All right, hello and welcome everyone to our webinar on implementing college readiness indicator systems in school and district settings. My name is Nettie Legters with REL Northwest, and I'll be facilitating our webinar today. But before we get rolling and as more people join on, I'm going to first pass the mic to my colleague Mitch Remeski, who's our resident IT guru and who's going to give you a quick tour of the system so that everyone knows how to participate when we come to the interactive parts of the webinar. Take it away, Mitch.
Hello, everybody. So I just wanted to let you know that for today's webinar, if you have any comments, please put them in the chat section on the right. And for questions, we'll collect those in the Q&A section. They won't always be addressed as they come in. Some of them will be addressed during the Q&A portion of the webinar. If you have any trouble getting on the audio, obviously you wouldn't be hearing me right now, but there are instructions that I've put in the chat out to all participants that'll help you get on the phone line. The other option is just to use your computer's speakers. You don't need a microphone because we won't be unmuting anybody or allowing participants to talk today, but you can get in touch with us via the chat or Q&A. Thanks.
Great. Thanks a lot, Mitch. All right. So our webinar today is hosted by REL Northwest, which, as many of you know, is one of 10 regional education labs, or RELs, funded by the Institute for Education Sciences and the U.S. Department of Education. All the RELs for many, many years have worked in close partnership with districts, states, and other stakeholders to improve academic and life outcomes for all students. And in these partnerships, one of our primary missions is to promote and support the use of research and evaluation and other forms of evidence and data to inform decision making and create and help you all create more effective schools and school systems. And that is very much the focus of today's webinar. Here are the goals for the webinar today. We're going to start out with a brief overview of the College Readiness Indicator System, also known as CRIS, which is an initiative that has pulled together really in one place some of the best thinking about what college readiness means and how to measure it, and what it would take to make college readiness really a routine outcome for all students. Then we're going to learn from, I'm very excited about this, two really compelling examples of how this big idea of college readiness for all students is really being brought up the page. First, in an innovative high school in New York City that's operated by New Visions for Public Schools. And then second, across an entire school system, an entire school district in San Jose Public Schools. And as Mitch mentioned, we will have some Q&A following each of the case study presentations. And we do encourage you to go ahead and type in questions along the way. We have a really stellar lineup of presenters today. In addition to myself, we have Susan Fairchild, who is the Chief Knowledge Officer for New Visions for Public Schools. We also have Jason Willis, who's Assistant Superintendent for Community Engagement and Accountability in the San Jose Unified School District. And also Emily McGinnis, who is the Director of the Data Research and Accountability Division, also in San Jose Unified. I also wanted to give you all a sense of who's joining us today in our webinar as participants, who's in our virtual room. We had over 150 folks from 42 states and territories registered for the webinar today. And we have really I was struck by how diverse the group is, representing all different levels and sectors and many different roles within and outside of K-12 education organizations. And I think this really speaks to the growing understanding that preparing all young people for post-secondary success is what education in the 21st century really needs to be about. and that it's going to take all of us working together to get there. All right, speaking of working together, the backdrop of the New Visions and San Jose USD work that you're going to hear about today is the College Readiness Indicator Initiative. So in 2010, several years ago, San Jose and New Visions, along with several other school systems, received funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to really mine those big data systems that everyone's bringing online right now and develop indicators of college readiness, and then pilot supports and interventions for students focused on those indicators across a single feeder pattern of schools. So it was a pilot and really focusing on one elementary, one middle, and one high school in a feeder pattern. All right, the CRIS initiative also brought in some serious intellectual capital. If you see the organizations listed here on the slide, many of you might agree with me, it's a veritable dream team of university-based school improvement support organizations that, through the CRIS initiative, worked closely with the partner districts to carry out the work that I just described. So a major contribution of the first phase of CRIS is this framework that it developed, that it produced. And this is really kind of the big idea. There's a lot going on in this graphic, so I'm just going to point out three pieces. On the left side of the graphic, you see this really multidimensional understanding of what college readiness is. So college readiness is certainly academic preparedness, but it's not just that. This partnership, the CRIS partnership, also drew on David Connolly's and Carol Dweck's and others' work to incorporate kind of social and psychological and emotional dimensions of college readiness. And those are captured in the concepts of college knowledge and academic tenacity. And we can, if folks want to in the Q&A, unpack those a little bit more. Second piece, in the inner circle, the very inner circle of the graphic, there's also introduced a multi-level understanding of where change needs to happen and be measured. And you'll note that it's not just at the individual, student and teacher level. It's also at the school setting and even at the system level. So change really needs to be focused at every level of the system. And then finally, and I think perhaps most importantly, you see this kind of wheel of arrows going around in the middle of the graphic. And that's really representing how the indicators and supports are really linked through a collaborative, cyclical inquiry and improvement process that's taking place ideally at each of these levels and ideally connected between the levels. And that's all reflecting a lot of the good research and stuff that we've been learning from implementation and improvement science that's really come out over the past several years. The link down at the bottom is to the University of Chicago Consortium for Chicago School Research website, where you would be able to see, I think, a new version of this framework, a little updated, and also several tools that you might be interested in, including a menu of indicators, self-assessment tool for school districts, and also an implementation guide for CRIS. The Annenberg website and the Gardner's websites also have special CRIS pages that you can visit. So during the CRIS pilot phase, the partners really put a lot of emphasis and work into data and indicators, really getting the data infrastructure established and developing the indicators. But as New Visions and San Jose have moved forward, they really are now leading with the school design and system change work. So in a sense, the focus has shifted from building data systems to building systems of data use, really how adults at both the school and system levels can be organized and supported to use data, and really in service of not reporting and compliance, but in service of organizational learning and continuous improvement, and putting more students on the path to high school graduation and post-secondary success. So with that set up, I'm going to pass the mic over to Susan Fairchild to present her school level case. While we're doing that, while Mitch is doing that, I'm going to invite you all to respond to this poll. And what we're really interested in learning from this poll is, what aspect of this work are you most involved in right now, or are you most interested in learning about? Is it the indicators and measures of college readiness? Is it the data and reporting infrastructure, how to create that? Or is it linking data and college readiness indicators to school improvement and decision making? Kind of where is your work? And this is really going to help us not only talk to each other today, but also give us information for future bridge events for the REL system. All right, so how's our poll looking, Mitch?
About halfway there.
Okay. We'll just give it another few seconds. How much longer? Looks like most people. All right, everyone. Thank you for your responses to our polls. It looks like from the results that most of you are most interested in the third option, linking data and college readiness indicators to school improvement and decision making. Coming in a close second was a focus on the indicators and measures of college readiness. And then there are a few folks who are interested in the data and reporting infrastructure. And that is interesting and also not super surprising, since a lot of folks have been putting lots of energy into building these data systems, and now we're really interested in using them. All right, so I'm now going to pass this to Susan Fairchild, who's going to talk about the case, the school level case in New York City. Go ahead, Susan.
All right. Thank you very much for having me participate today. I'm delighted to be here. I'm going to quickly give you an overview of New Visions. Then I'm going to be spending the rest of the time talking about schools as high-performing organizations, learning organizations, like Nettie said, specifically the High School of Telecommunication Arts and Technology, located in Brooklyn, New York. Achieving the vision of Chris for New Visions has really been about working at the school level. This presentation today is based on a report that we released in 2014 entitled Design and Data Imbalance, Using Design-Driven Decision-Making to Enable Student Success. New Visions is a school reform organization that was started back in 1989. We were founded about 5 years after that watershed report, A Nation at Risk. And as most everybody here knows, that report highlighted the increasing rates of illiteracy, increasing numbers of graduates who are unprepared for college work. Early warning, at risk, indicators of risk, the terminology that all of us in this field have now become so familiar with, really can be traced back to this report. So back in 1989, when New Visions was founded, graduation rates in New York City were about 38%. Today, the graduation rate for New Visions schools is close to 75%. A big part of this increase in graduation was the work that we were doing from 1993 to 2007. We were key architects in the small school movement. During that period of time, and in partnership with then New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg, and with funding from the Gates Foundation, New Visions went into these large dysfunctional high schools and converted them to small schools. And what we've discovered through independent evaluations, that we're seeing sort of the long-term effectiveness of this strategy. And we continue to push the needle on graduation rates. In 2007, we became a school management organization, and today we manage the instructional and operational needs of 80 public high schools, and we are also a charter management organization. We have 6 charter high schools, and we are opening a 7th next year. In total, we're responsible for approximately 50,000 students. That's about the size of the Seattle School District. And we also, I want to just point out, we have a capacity building arm. We have a teacher and a principal preparation program. So our work has taken us from policy to the design of schools to the management of schools, each representing design at different levels in New York City's educational ecosystem. So for the rest of this presentation, I'm going to be focusing on design considerations that support schools as high-performing organizations. So schools account for an average of less than 20% of a child's waking hours. This quote from Paul Revell, the former Massachusetts Secretary of Education and the current director of the Redesign Lab at Harvard Graduate School of Education, it represents a really important moment of reckoning for all of us who are in education. What this means is there is no margin of error in our current educational system. With only 20% of a student's time allocated to educators, schools must respond to student need the very moment that need presents itself. Interventions must be rapid, they must be high quality, and they must be consistent. The characteristics that distinguish a high-performing school from a school that is consumed with putting out fires. So let me walk you through this visual. In this image, we're trying to convey how school response at the right moment in time can have dramatic consequences on a student's future. For hundreds of times every day, educators are making decisions where that right action could make a critical difference. And it really emphasizes the fact that schools play a powerful role in shaping students' academic trajectories. For example, School A at the top of this visual, this represents a high-performing, responsive school. When a student misses a day in this school, that absence triggers an attendance and parent protocol. The school intervenes the day the absence took place. Because the school intervened immediately and consistently, attendance problems were addressed and they never worsened. And because this student is attending school, there are a new set of opportunities that emerge. For example, this same school also has systems in place to flag when a student passes the state exit exam, but not with a score that would enable him to bypass remediation courses in college. So in this school, when a student is within striking distance of achieving a college-ready benchmark, a protocol is triggered, and they examine their scheduling options, and they get this student enrolled in prep courses that may result in a higher college-ready score that then allows him to bypass those remediation courses. This same student might have a very different trajectory in School B at the bottom. School B responds slowly and inconsistently and misses opportunities, which then leads to a very different set of problems. When attendance protocols are not triggered and attendance issues are allowed to worsen, this school is putting itself and their students in a very problematic position. When the time comes for the state exam test, this school is now concerned with just getting that student to show up to take the exam. But because the student has a spotty attendance record, it is less than certain that that student's going to pass the exam. So unlike School A, School B is no longer in a position to help this student attain a college-ready score. This school is now focused on just getting the kid to pass. So every delay and every slow response accumulates, and it limits student trajectories. The High School of Telecommunication, Arts, and Technology, which all of us here at New Visions and in the city refer to as Tele. Tele is a model school A. Tele is a regular school with regular teachers. It's got about 1,200 kids, 300 making up a cohort. They have a slightly higher percentage of students who qualify for free and reduced lunch than the citywide average. They also have a substantially higher percentage of students who are Hispanic and special education than the citywide average. So we're talking about a slightly higher need school, but with a fairly typical teacher workforce. So what makes Tele special is that this is a school that is organized and that is structured to achieve exceptional results. They combine a set of non-negotiable beliefs, such as the importance of early interventions, with flexible and responsive strategies. In other words, they never lose sight of the long view, but in the immediate moment, they know how to quickly adapt. And this is a school that knows how to wield teacher teams. They interlock their teacher teams in such a way that information about students is constantly flowing throughout their school. Basically, they have created a human early morning system. Now here on the left, you can see that Tele outperforms the citywide in terms of graduation. And then over on the right side, the scatter plot, what this is showing us is that Tele has higher college readiness performance, that's the y-axis, even though they have slightly higher student need, which is the y-axis. So basically what this scatter plot is showing is that the distance from that trend line is showing us that they're doing better than what would be expected. So how do they do this? Well, first of all, they have a mental model and a set of values that are unshakable. This is a school that really, and I've spent a lot of time at this school, this is a school that really knows itself. They believe that intensive resources applied during freshman and sophomore years are going to have long-term gains for all students in the school. And they have three core structures. They have defined the landscape that all students must travel. This is their core curriculum. And within that landscape, they have created specific student pathways through responsive course scheduling and programming, and they support the day-to-day steps of each student along that pathway with their human early warning system. The landscape, the pathways, and the steps at Tele, they do all three well. And here what we're looking at, it's a little complicated, but we're looking at their schedule in freshman and sophomore year. Really, curriculum is an interesting tool, and I think it embodies a school-level vision. And what's really interesting, and it struck me as a little counterintuitive when I first talked to the principal and a lot of the leadership at this school, is that they deliberately use their curriculum to slow kids down so that ultimately in future years they're able to speed them up. So all freshmen take English, writing, global history, and biochemistry courses that emphasize literacy and strengthen writing and critical thinking skills. This emphasis on writing and critical thinking is supported by a key design decision. Tele allocates more teaching power to the freshman year by making the ninth grade classes smaller. And then in sophomore year, these students are deepening and expanding their core writing skills, and they're continuing to build on their literacy and critical thinking skills. So what we're trying to visualize here is the speed of complexity. Complexity can happen just within the blink of an eye inside of a high school. For example, you might have students in 3 courses at the beginning of a year that culminate in a state exam. Here we are showing 10th graders grouped into Trig, Integrated Algebra 2, and Integrated Algebra 1. It's only 3 courses, but by the end of the semester, you have 10 radically different outcomes when you combine it with the exit exams that have to be immediately managed inside of the school. And then when you drill down to the individual student trajectory, it becomes even more complex. This image represents the potential trajectory of a group of students in one subject area. Now when you multiply this by 8 subject areas, it really is an enormous amount of complexity that a school has to manage. I like to think of this like a New York City subway map. So just as soon as a kid gets off of the train, the next train has to be right there waiting to move that student to the next level. And students really can't wait on the platform. Tele works hard from the get-go to not just keep kids on this pathway, but to make sure they're moving along it by managing the granular day-to-day steps. At the top of this slide, this visual, this represents the 9th and 10th grade learning structures. Tele divides its 9th and 10th graders into 3 small learning communities. That's SLC A, B, and C up there at the top. Each have about 100 students per SLC. Within each SLC, you have a team of 3 core subject teachers in English, global history, and science. Tele's SLC structure allows this team of teachers to focus on a shared group of students and then to compare notes on each student's progress in the other 2 classes. The kids at Tele know very quickly that if something happens in one class, that the teachers in the other 2 classes are going to know about it. But it's also the case that each of these teachers is planning together, and in this way they are ensuring consistency across 3 different classrooms. They use similar language and they use similar routines in their class. The teacher teams that comprise each of these SLCs are meeting every day, and they are constantly sharing information about their kids. That's what we're trying to show, that workforce structure at the bottom of the visual. They're focusing on the academic work and classroom behaviors. What's unique about this SLC design is that Tele has coupled this structure with a grade advisor. This is a teacher with a reduced teaching load who follows an incoming cohort of students from freshman year all the way to senior year. The grade advisor also meets daily with the SLC teacher teams, and they're bringing the individual student perspective into the conversation. So by combining the classroom picture and the classroom data that the teachers bring with the individual student perspective that the grade advisor brings, they have a much richer picture of the student. And the school also has guidance counselors who support the more complex socio-emotional needs of these kids. We call this interlocking teacher inquiry teams. By interlocking these different perspectives, we have a lot of data and information flowing throughout the school. The faster these teachers have information and the more complete that information, the faster they can intervene. This idea of interlocking inquiry in part distinguishes some early and traditional forms of early warning work to this interlocutive, collectively aware form of early warning, which is what Tele has in place. And I think this is what Nettie was saying, that we're not about building the data systems anymore. We're about using those systems and combining people in interesting ways inside of a school to get that information flowing so that continuous improvement and learning organization can emerge. Traditional early warning is about catching students who are on the edge of something, like dropping out or not graduating on time. And they focus on a student at a particular moment in time and not necessarily with a full, rich amount of data around that student. A more nuanced approach frames these problems as being about the interconnectedness of students in schools. All parts of a school are connected. The ninth graders at risk of dropping out and the seniors at risk of not graduating on time are not independent of one another. They vie for the same resources from the same educators in the same school. The notion of interconnectedness also helps us understand unintended consequences. There may be interventions at a school that are designed to intentionally move students who are lower performing in those lower performance categories, that would be the red and yellow students on the right, up into higher performance categories. But the equally important question is, are we inadvertently causing the higher performing students, those blue and yellow students on the left of this visual, to fall into a lower performance category? The point of our stock and flow tool, this is a data tool that we developed as part of CRIS, is to visualize longitudinal student performance data in such a way that we are trying to highlight interdependencies and the ways in which a school's design shapes student trajectories. This is a reflective tool that a school's only going to use about once a year to step back and look at how their strategies and systems have shaped student performance over time. Our stock and flow tool visualizes how progress to graduation is shaped over the course of 8 semesters. We use 6 performance categories. That's the left of the visual on the screen. On track to college readiness, blue, is the highest level of performance, while off track, red, represents the lowest performance level. Student progress can be measured as both a stock, a point in time accumulation, and as a flow, a dynamic movement across time. When you combine them and you visualize both dimensions, it produces a unique map of student performance. The width of each color band represents a percentage of students that are in each one of those performance categories. What is different about this tool is that it's showing how students' performance categories change not just from one semester to the next, but between semesters. In this way, we're trying to visualize how students drain out of or fill up performance categories at different moments in time. Here we are looking at how Tele's school structures have shaped the trajectories of the graduating class of 2013 from freshman year to graduation 4 years later. This big swath of blue represents the stock and flow pattern of the highest performance categories, students who are on track to college readiness over 4 years. So the structures that Tele has put into place in their school, those investments in freshman and sophomore years, those SLCs, the human early warning system, they are creating high-performing kids in their school. And you can see also at key moments in time how, particularly in the 11th grade, how big groups of kids drain out of this highest performance categories, and they never fully recover those students back. And at the other extreme, here we are looking at Tele's stock and flow patterns of their off-track students. One of the things that we believe here is that the blue that we just saw and the red are connected in some way. That if you really want to create a high-performing school where every kid can sort of reach the career and college-ready aspirations, well, we have to do that by also addressing these kids who are far off track. So even though Tele consistently graduates 80% or more of their students, many with an advanced Regents diploma, the highest diploma here in New York, their record of success excludes this one group of kids, the chronically low-performing students who make up this red band. Many of these students are already performing below grade level before they even enter 9th grade, and others join the ranks throughout high school. But once there, very few of these off-track students improve their performance patterns enough to shift into higher performance bands. Instead, they tend to either drop out or to remain enrolled in high school beyond 4 years. Now, because Tele has pushed the boundaries of success, this problem stands out. But Tele is not alone. This pattern of off-track student performance is pervasive across many American high schools, and it brings us back to where we began, the 1983 A Nation at Risk report, and the urgent need to support all kids. Even our highest performing schools still have work to do. And Tele has taken up the challenge. Today, we are in the process of documenting what they have done in the year since our Design and Data Imbalance report was released. We will be releasing their off-track intervention and a case study that we're working on within the next few months. So Nettie, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Susan. We do have a few minutes for a few questions that have been coming in the course of your presentation. And so if we can get those up, I think that one of the questions, Susan, was whether this design that you've described is really more for high-functioning schools, or could it also be working to improve a low-income and impoverished school, high school? And I think that it sounds like the example from Tele is that Tele is more on that low-income spectrum than it is on what you might consider to be, a super high-functioning high school. Can you remind us, was Tele an existing high school when it joined the New Visions Network, or was it a newly developed high school?
No, Tele has been around for a while, and this is a school that is a little bit below the citywide average, or it has greater needs than the citywide average. So this is a school that has been in place for a while, and these structures have been in place for a while. And what we wanted to see is really how over time these structures and their investment in early interventions in the freshman and sophomore year create the stability that we see in this school, that year after year after year, this school not only has had pretty high graduations relative to the rest of our schools. Remember, we've been with these schools since about 2007. They were graduating about 70% of their kids. Over time, they have now reached 85%. So it was a refinement to some of these structures that existed, and it was really, I think, the infusion of a lot of data and the ways that these teacher teams began to talk about data that makes a big difference.
That's so interesting, because I've always thought that, it's people that change systems, not necessarily data. And I still believe that, but it sounds like the data piece was a very important force in galvanizing the people, the adults, who were on these teams around a common set of information and a common purpose. And so it played a role in activating the teams and enabling them to focus on what they needed to focus on.
I think that's right. And I think that goes back to this notion of, at least in New York, we've been talking about inquiry teams for a long time. And I think the big difference in a high-performing school is when those inquiry teams interlock. You can have a group of folks meeting and doing some interesting work, but if what they're finding and what they're discovering isn't connected to other teams inside of that school, there's a break in the information flow. And when you have a break in information flow, there are time delays. And when there are time delays, that means that the intervention is going to, one, be slow, and it may be incomplete, because if you don't have a full set of information, the quality of that intervention might be less than optimal.
Right. Yeah, and that gets to another question that's been posed by one of our participants, and that is, can you say a little bit more about how school counselors and social workers fit into the team structure so that they're, not operating as an independent unit?
Well, I think that Tele is really great. It's a great example of how they utilize these different perspectives. So the guidance counselors are obviously working really closely with the socio-emotional needs of kids, but they learn about a lot of these needs through the teacher teams and through the grade advisors. And there's just this constant communication. And, of course, the guidance counselors are also supporting the college readiness and really moving the kids along in terms of making sure that their applications are getting in on time, that their essays are getting in on time. So it's a unique setup in this school in particular. And I think across all of our schools in New York City, the guidance counselor plays a tremendously important role. But in this school, it's not the guidance counselor who's doing that scheduling and programming. It's primarily the grade advisor with a devoted programming team in that school.
Interesting. So the guidance counselor is really working more on the social and emotional and kind of preparation side, where the academic pathways and counseling is more provided by that grade advisor.
Yes, that's right.
Does the grade advisor, another question we have is, do the teacher teams and the grade advisor actually meet daily?
Yes, they are in constant contact. And this is one of the things that was pretty incredible. So they sit in a common room, and they're grouped based on their SLCs. And the grade advisor really has the ability to sort of float among them. But the other thing that was interesting to me while I was studying this high school, I was primarily initially there to understand their scheduling and programming system. And multiple times a day, that grade advisor would be in that room with those programmers having conversations. And I was there for a good 6 or 7 months, and there was not a single day that I was there that there wasn't a lot of conversation happening. So a lot of people are involved and lots of conversations and lots of information is flowing, and it's the right people.
Great. One last quick question. Is the graduation rate reported four-year graduation rate?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. All right. So we have other questions coming in, and Mitch is doing a wonderful job of recording them and keeping track of them. And so we may be able to come back to some of those after we hear from our San Jose team on the system level case. Some really remarkable work happening there. But let me just thank Susan. Susan will come back again in the Q&A at the end. But Susan, thank you for such a wonderful presentation. It was very insightful and cool to see what's happening in this school. All right. So now we're going to pass the mic to Jason Willis and Emily McGinnis to talk about the College Readiness Indicator System work in San Jose Unified School District.
Thanks, Nettie, and really appreciate getting a chance to hear the continued evolution of Susan's work in New Visions. Very inspiring, and so we think a lot about the work that we do here in San Jose, and look at other great examples around the country, such as hers. So before I dive in, let me talk a little bit about San Jose Unified School District. We educate around 33,000 kids in the heart of Silicon Valley, just south of San Francisco in California. We're generally reflective of the California kind of state demographics. About half of our students are free reduced price lunch, about a quarter are English learners, and about just over half are Hispanic. We're extremely diverse, though in some parts of the district, those demographics are significantly higher, with schools that educate low-income EL and Hispanic populations. Where in other parts of the district, it may look very similar to a high-performing suburban district that you might visit, as part of the work that we do. San Jose Unified has had a really long history of kind of innovative and kind of forward-thinking approaches. I think in part that's due to our location. We're kind of pushed in that direction, which is really great given a lot of the work that happens here in Silicon Valley. But I think even more so, it's really because of the people. It's something that we've been very proud of, to have people in this organization that don't take the status quo as what is the best for kids, and is constantly thinking about ways in which to evolve and change, and kind of push boundaries around changing the work and trajectory of all of our students' outcomes. And that hasn't changed over the course of the last 5 years under the direction of a new superintendent, Dr. Vince Matthews. We developed a strategic plan back in 2012 that's really led the work that we're doing in this organization that really focuses on a few kind of key drivers. First and foremost, we've focused a lot on our people, how adults think about their interaction, and ultimately the kind of delivery on our mission, which is to eliminate the opportunity gap and ensure 21st century skills for all of our kids. And when we name it opportunity gap for a very specific purpose, and in part because we really want to draw attention to the adults in the system, who are the ones that either for themselves or for their predecessors have created systems, policies, and structures that that inhibit the ability of all kids to be able to learn. So the focus on people is really key for us. Our focus on instruction is kind of well-known statewide. Our early implementation of Common Core has been a direction that we kind of set forth, again, back when we developed the strategic plan, knowing that that was a great step forward to delivering on our promise around 21st century skills. And we constantly think about different systems that we need to be able to improve, and one of the ones that I'm going to talk about today, along with Emily, is our OffStep process, which, based on the poll, I think linking Chris to school improvement efforts, hopefully you'll get a flavor of the work we're doing here in San Jose. I really like this slide. It's also like a super inspiring guy. But one of the things we talk about in the school district, I talked about focus, but we really mean when we want people to focus, they really need to focus on one or two things. And I think most school districts engage in behavior of trying to kind of address everything. And there's a lot. I mean, we've got a lot to manage and a lot of hard conversations and a lot of needs to be met. But one of the things that kind of underrides a lot of the work that we do, kind of this belief that if you get really, really good at doing one thing and doing it with a team and communicating and delivering on it, that it's going to be much easier to replicate that process in some other arena, be it at a school site, in a department, district-wide. And that can be frustrating, again, because we're such a large organization and there's so many needs, but there's some real intentionality behind why we're taking that approach, and that's very reflected in the work we're doing around what we call OffStep. So as a part of the development of our strategic plan, we also articulated a series of key performance measures when we were doing a lot of our initial research about how we wanted to track our progress as an organization, what kind of strategies we wanted to build in order to check for progress and provide support along the way. We looked at a lot of different places across the country. Organizations like Montgomery County with their 7 keys to success, New York City's police department and their kind of original kind of CompStat work, Boston Public Schools and the work that they're doing, they've been doing around similar types of efforts with their schools, and really drew on that in a very kind of significant way. So, for us, we think about it as key performance measures. So every one of these measures articulate towards a high school graduate that leaves us with a set of 21st century skills. And we articulate them by level. Some of them are at elementary, middle, and high. But the intention is, the way to think about it is, that they're really kind of postmarks, right, along a path as a student moves through our system in their 13 years. Are they meeting the benchmarks that we've established around, be it early literacy at elementary, academic persistence, perseverance at middle school, or SAT, ACT success, or A to G eligibility at the high school level. So the framing of this is really important because, and I'm going to go back to the focus, right? So one of the approaches that, some systems may have taken is telling the schools, make sure you make progress on all these indicators. And we thought about that work very differently. And I'm going to kind of hand it over to Emily to let you hear a little bit more about kind of how these key performance measures are actually being acted upon and a little bit more about the OffStep process.
So as Jason shared just a moment ago, San Jose Unified School District identified a set of key performance measures at the outset with our strategic plan, Opportunity 21. And at that point, we could have stopped and we could have said, these are the pieces we want all of our sites to focus and work on. But we recognized that we needed to move a step further beyond just identifying those measures into actual action. And so for us, we decided and made the intentional decision to be parsimonious in our work over the last few years under our key performance measures. And I think that's very reflective of Jason's point earlier and our commitment as an organization that you can't attempt to do everything at the same time and expect to do it well, nor can you expect to see real meaningful change for students if you approach the work as a treat everything equally. So for us as a district, we made the decision to focus on gaining momentum in a few key areas, make sure that we had a system that was refined, that was reflective of the needs of the adults in the system, that built capacity with the adults that actually work with our students on a daily basis, and then make sure that we expanded outward to additional KPMs once we felt we had confidence in the process we developed, and in the measures and metrics that sit underneath our focal key performance measures. So for our work, we call this process of support and accountability around the key performance measures OffStat. And OffStat for us begins not with a set of data and not with a charge to go out and do something, but really begins with the questions that you see in front of you. And these questions are the questions that we pose at each level to our building leadership, our site administrators. And these are the questions that we ask them to focus on as they think about how they're going to change outcomes for students. So as you can see for us, instead of trying to focus on multiple key performance measures, we as a district are currently deeply committed to and engaged with 4 of our key performance measures: early literacy, middle school math, academic perseverance, and UC, University of California, and California State University, Readiness, and AP IB enrollment. So after identifying those focal KPMs and framing our questions to begin the work, our next step is to engage our schools in an accountability and a support cycle. And I think what really sets San Jose Unified's OffStep process apart in many ways is that it leans just as heavily on support for sites and for adults in the system as it does on accountability. And for us, our stance throughout our OffStat development has really been about how do we bind accountability and support in such a way that this doesn't become a hammer, this doesn't become a punitive process that adults can disengage with, but it remains vital and relevant and very close to our bottom line, which is making sure that our students are prepared for 21st century skills. And so within OffStat, we've built in several measures and checks to ensure that support and resources are allocated flexibly and fluidly across the course of a year to sites as needed based on student data. So in terms of our OffStat cycle, it's comprised of 3 pieces, all of which are rooted in a cycle of inquiry. We start with support sessions annually where we ask sites to reflect on the questions that we shared earlier in this presentation and come up with some possible root cause for those questions. Only after each site, and we have 42 comprehensive school sites in our district, only after each site has arrived at a root cause do we then begin to utilize the data within our district. And we take our data and we test those hypotheses that sites have come up with to say, well, if you feel the root cause is X, well, what data can we look at to help validate that possible root cause? Once sites have validated that root cause, they then move into developing a theory of action, and all of this is deployed through our support sessions, where sites work not in isolation, not a principal in a room alone, but with a leadership team or with all teachers to develop the theory of action that's going to drive their work over the course of the year. And then from there, naturally, out of that theory of action work flows their action planning. Following that initial write of their OffStat action plan, each principal in San Jose Unified School District presents their action plan to the superintendent and senior leadership for feedback, for refinement, for adjustments, and that occurs right at the beginning of our school year. So for us, that's in August. Sites then move forward with deployment of the plan, and we have 6-week checks along the way, additional accountability sessions, where sites come back in, share their progress, reflect on their data, receive feedback, and in those sessions also receive additional supports as needed. And those accountability sessions are where really the rubber meets the road, where the principal is engaging and being very open and honest and transparent around the work, and the superintendent and core leadership team are providing that much needed feedback in real time. So this isn't about writing a plan once a year and then maybe we come back to it 180 instructional days later. This is a plan that's vital, that's living, that all members of the district are engaging with. So I mentioned earlier that really what we feel sets this work apart or brings it to a different level versus past attempts and approaches to accountability is the support side. So within San Jose Unified School District, we approach support in a couple of different ways. Just as we expect our teachers to differentiate their instruction based on the needs and skills of the students in their classrooms, we work to be very agile and differentiate the support that our principals and sites receive. We're constantly looking at the leading indicator data that sits underneath our key performance measures to see how we need to break our schools apart to ensure that the support they get is really based on the areas where they're excelling or the areas where they need acceleration. So you might see in a support session a subset of schools receiving intense support on data analysis, or you may see a set of schools where our curriculum and instruction department is deploying a high level of coaching support to the teachers based on what we're hearing, seeing, and learning through their OffStat plans. Or you may see that a subset of principals are receiving support in presentation and communication skills or engagement skills to ensure that they're really working with their core leadership team and their teachers to develop a plan that everyone is bought into and everyone is engaged on. Those support components don't just happen in isolation. We also link that with on-site follow-up. So within central office, we have key leaders who are directly assigned to school sites and check in with school sites at least once a month, if not more often, on plan implementation, on progress of student performance, and on any other issues that may link back to a site's OffStat plan. And then going back into accountability, we also ensure that sites receive timely feedback, just as we would expect students to receive timely feedback on their learning. So it's not just that every 6 weeks you present a plan and you receive a little bit of feedback. It's that you're constantly receiving evidence-based feedback. Based on what you put in your plan, here's what we're observing at the site, here's the impact it's having on students. And that feedback is woven throughout our system. So a principal and a site can expect to receive that feedback not just from the superintendent or an assistant superintendent, but also from a director, from a manager, from a coach, and it all links back into their focal area under OffStat. The other side of that, and the piece that I think most people tend to be curious about, is what does the accountability session look like? So as I mentioned, we have our OffStat panel comprised of senior leadership, the presenting principal, and then my department staff supporting and observing. As principals present their plans, they actually don't present in isolation. They present in front of their peers their plan and their data. And we're very intentional about this structure because one thing we've learned through our work in follow-up with principals and gaining feedback from them is they find the accountability session very powerful in terms of gauging not just how they're progressing against other sites, but also learning what other sites are doing that they might borrow from or adapt. Because throughout this, our goal is constantly to identify effective interventions at the student level, at the site level, at the system level, that we can then evaluate and ideally deploy system-wide.
So in terms of some of the follow-up that happens out of the accountability sessions themselves, I'll talk a little bit about particularly the superintendent and his council, which is essentially his senior leadership team, and then some of the kind of cross-departmental work that happens with schools. So we, part of the early feedback that we've had through this process is about creating consistent feedback for principals. And so we've developed, and we're kind of in different iterations of this now, and actually our second or third iteration of a rubric that the panel uses to provide feedback to principals. And we really believe that creating clarity around what the purpose of the process is and what outcomes we expect and being clear with principals about that creates even further alignment with the work that we're doing as an organization to ensure that there's linkage between what we expect to see when we walk into the room, as well as principals, and then also what they're delivering on when they leave the sessions themselves. And one of the things that we've been working on, and I have to give a lot of credit to Emily and the team that she oversees, is that, in a lot of ways you can create data visualizations off of any kind of data that exists because there's a morass of it in school districts. But I think what's even more powerful about the work we do in San Jose Unified is that Emily works with a lot of her peers in curriculum instruction, in administrative services, within my division, to make sure that the way that the visualizations and the metrics are being counted, thought about on behalf of students is both aligned as well as impactful. And this has resulted in our latest iteration of we now have dashboards available for each of the metrics that Emily shared earlier that we use during both the accountability session as well as offline outside of those sessions that are updated pretty routinely, so we can get a sense of how schools are making progress on those key performance measures that we care so much about. I'll share some early results. These are from last year, and probably the better way to talk about this is kind of what we know has happened so far this year. So you can see that particularly in early literacy and AP and IB, we've made a significant amount of growth, at least at the end of last year. Advanced math, we didn't see as much of a growth in terms of what we expected to see. You'll also notice that for most of these metrics, they're within year metrics. So we measure these things essentially multiple times throughout the course of the year because we want to be able to iterate and work with schools to capture kids much more quickly. It's kind of a huge learning I think everyone across the country knows about from NCLB. What we know today in terms of what our 14-15 results look like is that they continue to get better. Our early literacy rates continue to climb. One of the things that's important to note is that within obviously early literacy, the assessment we use, there's different bands, and we've seen actually a significant growth in the percent of students that are moving from the at band to the above band. So in addition to continued growth, it hasn't been as fast as it was last year, but we see that the teachers and principals are getting even better at being able to refine and identify the skills that students need to be even further ahead when they leave second grade headed into their critical third grade year. The other results that we just recently got for high school was around our graduation rates and A to G going rates. And our graduation rates are up overall nearly 4%, and Hispanics have been growing at an even faster rate than both overall as well as our white population, which again really speaks to our mission, and we want to accelerate the growth, particularly of our low-income and Hispanic populations, and we're seeing that happening both with our graduation rates as well as our A to G rates. which is really something for us to celebrate as an organization. And early kind of results from advanced math, we were looking at grade results from earlier in the semester. That negative trend has since turned positive. I think we're still in the single digits, but it continues to move. So we've got a lot of things that I think as an organization we can be proud of, a lot more work to do. But obviously we can see that the process that we put into place, and I think a lot of people would attribute it to creating just an opportunity for people to have consistent, constant conversations about the work of students and progress, and keeping it focused on the few metrics that we're working on is creating movement for an organization even as large as ours, serving 33,000 kids. The last thing that I'll mention is just some lessons learned. I talked about the focus. As far as change is concerned, I think we're a people business. Like most of our entities, we spend the vast majority of our money on people. And so it's really important to invest in that as opposed to like, I can pull a curriculum off the shelf or I can create this assessment and that's going to create change. And being able and being ready to invest in an ever-evolving approach is really important, right? You can't just let it sit, and when you get feedback, you have to be ready to adjust it really quickly, and I think that creates a lot more integrity for people that are involved in the process when they see things are changing as a result of legitimate feedback to the process. The monitoring on site has been a really key element for us this year. It really was able to close the gap between the conversations that were happening during the accountability sessions and any of the follow-up. We've kind of redirected some positions internally to be able to focus on that. Again, going back to like what's the most important, so we haven't added like more and more FTE in the central office. We've essentially just repositioned positions and people to focus on what's most important. And I talked earlier about the data and the streamlining in the process. We can dive there if there's any interest, but real hats off to Emily and her team for keeping it real simple for everyone to be able to understand and stay focused on the results we need. So that'll conclude our presentation, and Nettie, I assume we'll kind of moderate any Q&A that we might have.
Yes, thank you, Jason and Emily, for your inspiring work and for a terrific presentation. We do have some questions that are coming in that Mitch is getting organized for us. If you have questions for Jason and Emily and also for Susan, please feel free to type those in the Q&A chat. I wanted to lead with a question, Jason, a little bit where you left off around the data research and accountability division in San Jose Unified, which is where kind of the project lives that you're describing. And it's not just a project, it's a whole new way of doing business. And I wonder if Emily, perhaps you or Jason could speak to what that department looks like now compared to, and what it does now compared to perhaps 4 or 5 years ago.
So I think one of the really important things to kind of reemphasize about this process is that, right, and this is where, within, education organizations, it can very much turn into a quote project or like the solution. Like this is our culture now, right? Like one of the best examples I have, we got through our first year last year. We're now in our coming up at, ending our second year with this process. And Emily and I were talking about making sure that all the new principals knew about like what OffStep was and what was supposed to be happening. We had something like 8 or 9 or 10 different principals that were starting with us. And Emily came to me and said, I don't really think we need to do the orientation session with the new principals. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, they got to know about OffStep. And she's like, no, you don't understand. Like, they've already gotten the information from all the other principals in the system, telling them to expect, like, this is just a part of the work that we do in San Jose Unified. And I think that's super powerful because it is a part of our culture now here in San Jose Unified. And so when people think about, if you're going to work in this organization, you should be prepared to respond, interact, engage with, this process as a part of improving student achievement. And I think that's really just indicative of the fact that Emily doesn't feel like she owns this. There's a lot of other departments that touch this work. Yes, I mean, what she does is an absolute critical element, but there's a lot of other departments that starts, and it really starts with the superintendent that's committed to this as being an indelible process within the organization. But I think, you know, Emily, you should probably speak to kind of how your department's really evolved over the course of the last couple of years as a result of this process.
So when we launched our OffStep work and I came on board as the director of the Department of Data Research and Assessment, we were actually one of the smaller departments within the central office. I had 8 staff members underneath me. And we really, for all intents and purposes, oversaw state and federally mandated assessments and the data warehouse. When I started 2 summers ago, Jason laid out where the district wanted to go in terms of moving from just monitoring data to acting upon data. So it was a unique time for us because we were also in the midst of building a new data warehouse. We were between vendors. So right out the gate, I was very fortunate that within my very small department, I had myself, I had a data integration manager, and then I had a member of my department who had a strong background in research and research methodology. And so the 3 of us really started building this process with an eye to how do we keep it actionable for sites, how do we keep the data manageable, and how do we keep everyone engaged in what is ultimately a pretty complex process. Where we are now is I now actually oversee a department of 29, and really in response to this work, it wasn't that I suddenly was able to hire 21 new people. Just as OffStep has allowed us to support sites in refining practice and shifting resources, I would say that the OffStep process led to our division and our district recognizing that instead of having a data research and assessment department and then having a completely separate technology services department, those 2 departments really needed to become one. And I don't think we're unique in that previous to bringing those 2 departments together, sort of half the data was managed in my smaller department, and then half the data was managed in the technology department. And so for us, what's happened has been that instead of having 2 separate data teams that at times might have felt at odds or disconnected from the core work of student improvement, we now have an end-to-end data team that sits under one director, sits in one department, and that in turn has only allowed us, I feel, to be more efficient in meeting the needs of our sites. I know someone had on the Q&A, and I apologize if I'm jumping in out of queue, someone had a question about how do you balance this workload against the work of teaching, against the work of a school. And from the outset, I've been, and Jason has been, really committed to our job is to make this as simple as possible. Our job is not to have our principals build their data architecture skills. Our job is not to ask principals to try to understand complex data sets. Our job is to get our principals comprehensive metrics in real time so they can focus on what sites do best, teaching and learning. So, Nettie, just to circle back, I think the biggest shift for us isn't that we're suddenly hiring new people or creating new positions. It's really like we're looking at a piece of the puzzle and bringing things into alignment at a central office level in a way that I don't think the district as an entity might have imagined even 36 months ago.
Right. Thank you. Staying on this piece around time commitment, this is not only a big time commitment for schools, but it's also a big time commitment for district staff, particularly around the support and accountability sessions for OffStep. And I wonder, Jason, if you could speak to how that works for you all. You know, how has it come to a place where administrators within the district office are able to put this amount of time into this priority?
Yeah, so I think that this really goes back to focus, and I have just been thoroughly impressed with our ability to stay on message. I mean, things got a little bit difficult this year. But for the last, 3 years since we began implementing the strategic plan, we've been very consistent as a senior leadership team across both our leaders and our teachers about saying, we want to not only kind of reemphasize for you that a focus is important, but we're willing to do things that allow you to focus, which includes really assessing our own practices and about how we're impacting principals' time, teachers' time, making sure that the things that we require, the kind of needs of schools, are being taken care of as often as they can here in the central office before they go out to schools. But I also think, really working side by side with principals. So when they do feel like they are overburdened, that we sit down with them and say, all right, let's prioritize. Let's go back to, like, what is the 1, 2 most important things we need to focus on, what we've said as a district. Let's put those at the top of the list. Everything else, let's figure out how to message around that. And one of the other kind of powerful examples that I can offer is that, for those on the call that are from California, this probably exists in most other places across the country. Each school develops a school plan where they have to articulate kind of the goals that they wish to achieve with the students at the school, what are the metrics they're going to use to achieve that, and then how are they using their resources to get to that place. And up until this year, we had schools that were not only engaging in developing those school plans, but were also creating plans for OffStat. And then in cases of high schools, they were also going through accreditation and a variety of other plans that were required. So as an organization, we said, this is a huge inefficiency for us. So what we've since done is taken all of that and consolidated it into one plan. So when schools are working on their planning process for the upcoming year, they're checking the box on things like all the compliance stuff that we need to provide to the state, but more importantly, they're at the same time having discussions about what the school's headed into next year. It becomes the foundation upon which they're executing their OffStat plan. So that's just one example of some of the efficiency.
I would just say the other thing is we really approach this not from trying to build a beautiful system that then everyone has to fit themselves into, but really turning it. I almost think of it as flipping the perspective of the telescope. So our job at central office isn't to say you need to do this plan, you need to take these steps, you have to do this work. For us, it's always the stance from the outset has always been, if our goal is to change outcomes on these key performance measures, and if we're saying that those focal questions that I shared earlier in the presentation, if those are our bottom line, what do we need to do to make that happen? And I think when you approach the work that way, the time management or the workload management, I won't say it goes away, but it doesn't feel like a burden because you've already set the focus really clearly. And the shift that we've undergone in the last 90 days where we took what used to be disparate plans for different intended audiences and purposes and finally saying all of your budget's going to go into this single document, all of your data is going to go into this single document, all of your thinking work is going to go into this single document, has really freed our principals and our school sites up to do the work that we want them to do, which is think about how we ensure that our students are exceeding the vision and mission that we have set for ourselves as an organization. That being said, there are always logistical pieces that you can't get away from, and I'm, maybe not in this call, but at another time, I'm always happy to speak to those because there are details that you have to attend to. But it's really about the stance and the mindset that you bring to the work and the way that you show adults in the system that you're backing their play around it as well.
Thank you. Yeah, it's getting back to what Susan was talking about earlier about mental models and values, and I was really struck by, Susan, your phrase when you said the school, that Telly's a school that really knows itself. And I would say the same thing, Jason and Emily, about where San Jose is and is heading. It's a school system that is really knowing itself, what it's about, what's important, what are you already good at, where do you need to grow, and how to move forward with alignment with your mission, and goals and values, and a lot of consistency in operationalizing your work. So I'm going to invite Susan and Jason and Emily to respond to some of the additional questions that have been coming in. We do have a few more minutes, and one of the questions that came up from a registrant during the registration period, and has also come up again, is kind of the application, particularly of your work, both at the school and system level, in consideration of students who are perhaps very much at risk due to being homeless or in foster care or being in gangs, being involved in some pretty tough stuff. And we're curious, I think this questioner is curious, and I am too, about how Tele and how perhaps schools within San Jose or the whole system as a whole kind of works with students in these groups.
So one of the things that has been super powerful, and I'm a total data geek, so I really love this kind of stuff in terms of what it results in. But so since we've started this OffStep process, leadership has a lot of time to look over a lot of data, particularly around early literacy, both consistent metrics we use over the year, as well as the data that principals bring in. We get a great opportunity to see into how principals are thinking about these populations differently. And so one of the kind of emerging trends that we started seeing about, and I would say about, back in the fall with our second series of OffStep sessions, was that there was a difference in the way that students that were consistently at the school were performing versus those that what you might call a transient population. And obviously that was exacerbated at the north end of our district, our more low-income, higher Hispanic populations, versus the south end, much more stable, kind of white Asian communities. And one of the things that we started thinking about was, well, how might we think about addressing this? And so we're actually in the process of investigating just how big a difference there is in performance, knowing that a lot of the students that are more transient are likely to have backgrounds like foster youth, homeless, parents that are, perhaps immigrants that are moving in and out of the system. And we have some of our schools that have actually done a really nice job in developing strategies to get those kids in and integrated into the system immediately. In fact, in the last series of OffStep sessions, there were several schools that had already developed essentially like intake protocols with the kids. So even before the CUME files showed up, they had like tested the student, they'd gotten them kind of set up with an initial set of services and had them integrated into the class almost immediately. So it says to us that there's already schools that are really looking at these populations, not only because obviously they contribute to the overall growth and performance of the school, but more importantly because they're a kid, right? And I think that's we talk a lot about individual kids, individual teachers in these sessions, and when you think about K-12 education, like that's where the work is. And if we're creating what I would describe as probably nearly 40 hours of discussion strictly about individual kids and students between senior leadership and principals, super powerful for the system.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that responsive programming that really is in place that you're describing. Susan, would you like to add anything to that from the Tele or New Vision's perspective?
Yeah, it's right on time. We have a group here at New Visions that's actually working on understanding these very off-track kids, and particularly these kids in foster care, these kids who are homeless. We don't have super great data in terms of being able to identify those kids. So one of the things that we're doing is we're working with Tele, again, because they've taken on this challenge of trying to help support in a new and different way this off-track, and in some cases it's far off-track group of kids. In the field of education, we use the word intervention a lot. And it hasn't been until we've been studying what Telly has been doing over the course of this last year that I have a deep respect for what that word, that one word, means for this particular group of kids. This is something that once you begin an intervention around these kids in high school, it's not an intervention where a kid comes in and is going to leave. This is an intervention that is going to last all 4 years, and it's an intervention where kids are added to it, that there are kids who become off track during the course of their freshman year. So essentially what Telly is doing, that mental model where they say intensive interventions that are applied to freshman and sophomore years, well, they've extended it to before a kid even walks through the door. And that's the fascinating thing. It's not that they have in any way let go of their mental model. They're just simply extending it. They're looking at 7th grade data in their feeder schools to anticipate who these kids are who potentially might become off track. And just in the course of this 1 year, they have had a summer bridge program where they have invited these kids who they have gotten to know through 8th grade in terms of their data and kids who are likely to come into their schools. They invite these kids and their families to get to know one another during a lunch in summer. Then they have them part of a summer bridge program where there's a lot of community building that's going on in order to get them familiarized with other kids and to help strengthen the social relationships and to make sure they also know some adults inside of the school. And then the other thing that's happened over the course of the year, they've built out a Wednesday guidance group, and this was formed as a way to continue that socio-emotional component of the summer bridge. And then after that, and seeing how kids are doing, they made a few modifications, and then they've added some Wilson reading and some just words to really develop the literacy and the numeracy skills of these kids. They've then layered in an additional piece, which they call the Breakfast Club, where every morning before first period from like 7:30 until 8, these kids are meeting with a staff member, a faculty member, and they're getting themselves organized for the day, making sure their notebooks are in order, making sure that their homework is done. And then they've layered some additional pieces in. But every step of the way they're looking at data, and they are increasing the intensity. So there's some kids who at this point have had 5 different forms of these interventions, and they're looking at, from marking period to marking period, who's failing classes, kids who've failed 2 or more, they're immediately dealt with. And it's been really interesting to see the way that an intervention for this group of kids has begun to unfold. And we now have data that is beginning to show exactly what it takes to move an off-track kid. And it is intensive, and it doesn't end.
Great. Thank you for elaborating on that. We're really getting a good picture of the kind of targeted and intensive supports that Telly is wrapping around the most at-risk and off-track kids. Thank you. So we're reaching the end of our time, and I want to close first by showing you all some of the resources that will be posted. Mitch has been communicating with some of you who've asked whether the webinar is being recorded. The webinar is definitely being recorded and will be available on the REL Northwest website. And as part of the PowerPoint that will be posted there, you'll have the links to many of the resources that are behind the work that was presented today, including an Ed Northwest blog that has links to many organizations that are involved in post-secondary and career or college and career readiness. Also, one of Susan's blogs from New Visions, and there ought to be also linked to several of the tools that Susan showed during her presentation if you want to get a closer look at those, as well as to the case study report from Tele itself, Data and Design Imbalance. And sort of keep visiting the New Visions site for the next case study that's coming up that Susan described. And Susan, do you have anything else to add in terms of these resources that are up here in terms of the Cloud Lab or Stock and Flow?
You know, I think New Visions is always doing a lot of innovative stuff, and the website is a really great place to just check in on things. Thank you for asking.
And I also encourage everyone to visit the San Jose Unified School District site and particularly check out their equity policy and their strategic direction, their strategic plan, Opportunity 21. You can see all the key performance metrics there and keep up to date on the progress that San Jose is making. Later this summer, we'll be putting out a case study about the San Jose work. These first couple of years of really going system-wide with a college readiness indicator and support system. And so we'll stay tuned for that. We have an additional set of resources on the next slide. That just is our links to the College Readiness Indicator System initiative on various websites and other resources for all of you who are interested in learning more about college readiness indicators and how to support the implementation of the kinds of systems that you've heard about today. Let me close by thanking our presenters for your truly inspiring work. It's really moving the field forward, and I'm so delighted that we've been able to capture that on the webinar today and archive it so other folks can learn. I want to thank Mitch, our IT guru, for all his support in the last 90 minutes plus, and all of you for participating today. Please don't hesitate to contact us if you have any additional questions, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.